The following episode contains discussions of domestic violence, murder, and the recounting of traumatic events. Listener discretion is advised. The last day of summer 2015 is warm, with tops of 32 degrees Celsius. Tara Costigan wakes up in her 3-bedroom home in Calwell, Canberra, and thinks she might take her kids to the local pool. She has 2 sons, aged 9 and 11, and a daughter, only a week old. Tara is probably tired. Her sleep was disturbed by text messages to her aunt, Maria, updating her on her grandmother, Margaret, who's in hospital. Tara also had a lot on her mind. She recently separated from her long-term partner, the father of her newborn baby, and things were becoming increasingly volatile. But today, she just wanted to enjoy this hot, beautiful Saturday with the people she loved most in the world, her 3 kids. Nothing about her slow, quiet morning indicated that it might be her last one. By the time the sun set, Tara Costigan would be dead. I'm Jessie Stevens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In this episode, I'm speaking with Heidi Lemon, author of The First Time He Hit Her, the shocking true story of the murder of Tara Costigan, the woman next door. Heidi spent the past few years devoted to writing the book and worked closely with the Costigan family during the project. How did Tara Costigan meet her boyfriend, Marcus Rappel?
Yeah, so there were 2 possible versions of how they met. Tara's grandmother remembers that Tara told her she met him through an online dating site, which Tara had used in the past. But there's another story that she met him through a friend. So either account there might be elements of both accounts that are accurate there. Who knows?
And what was Tara like as a mother?
Oh, she was utterly devoted. She was at one point working 3 jobs to ensure that she could give them the very best lifestyle that she possibly could. She was extremely loving and just a real giver. Everybody I spoke to really lingered over their memories of Tara the mother because her children were her world. They were her everything, and she did everything she could for them.
What had her upbringing been like? Because she hadn't had a necessarily conventional relationship with her own mother, had she?
Yeah, so she lived with her family until she was 18, and then she moved out. Basically, she lost contact with her mother after she moved out of the house and became very close to the paternal side of the family. In particular, she became very close with Maria Costigan, her aunt, her deceased father's sister, and Margaret, her maternal grandmother. They were her go-to figures a lot of the time. She was also extremely close with her sisters and had a couple of very close friends as well.
She lost her father quite young, didn't she?
She did. Tara's father actually committed suicide when it was 1994. You know, she certainly took that in, and I believe she had a tattoo on her back, or no, I don't know if it was on her back. She had a tattoo devoted to her father, and he was always a presence in her life.
And what did Tara's family initially think when she introduced them to Marcus? What was their first impression?
Various reactions. Initially, I think everybody thought that he was okay, pretty quiet. There wasn't a great deal of alarm bells or anything like that. But although Michael Costigan, who's Tara's uncle, remembers a distinct feeling of uncertainty, like there was something indescribable about Marcus, he felt, that didn't quite sit right with him. And Margaret, Tara's grandmother, felt the same. And certainly Chris, Tara's uncle, had a very averse reaction to Marcus, and took an instant dislike, which at the time he dismissed as being a bit of an uncle thing. No one was really good enough potentially for Tara in his eyes, but in retrospect, he just, I mean, obviously it's become something of a significant moment in retrospect. But I think initially Marcus didn't really set off any alarm bells for anybody. He seemed a quiet, hardworking, decent enough bloke who Tara was obviously infatuated with, and they wanted Tara to be happy. So at that early point, everyone was pretty happy.
And he'd had a child with a previous girlfriend, Kira. Did he have any relationship with that child, and how had things ended with Kira? What sort of terms were they on?
Yeah, that was a very bitter breakup, and quite a dispute had arisen surrounding the birth of their child. So Marcus had recently broken up with Kira, and she had given birth to their child, and there had been a dispute as to the child's paternity. Kira had told Marcus that the child was his, and then took it back during an argument and told him that it wasn't his, then admitted that it was his. So there was Marcus had quite a few issues surrounding this particular relationship, and Kira had in fact put a domestic violence order, or a DVO, against Marcus after he went to her house one night and threw a brick through her window out of frustration, in his words, at her lies. So that's the context in which he entered his relationship with Tara. Tara was utterly smitten with Marcus, and she was prepared to take him for his word when he explained to Tara that he had been emotionally manipulated throughout that relationship. She wanted to develop, obviously, with Marcus, and she was more than prepared to take him at his word there.
And in those first few months when she knew about Marcus's history, were there any initial signs that he might be someone who was potentially abusive? What did their relationship look like?
So initially there was a period of, great happiness and joy, and there was a lot of holidays down at the coast, a lot of barbecues, a lot of joy. Tara introduced him to her children. They developed a healthy relationship. He moved in fairly quickly, and so it was quite a passionate progression. A quick and passionate progression of the relationship. It's impossible to say when the trouble started, of course, because that's something we can never really know. But Tara's family had certainly begun to pick up on signs that something was amiss by early 2014. Tara's grandfather became very ill, was admitted to hospital and died in early 2014. And in fact, it was February 27th. And on that date, it was later documented by Tara in her affidavit for the DVO she would apply for exactly 1 year later. She documented that as she was weeping for her grandfather, he was berating her from the bathroom door, basically calling her some horrific names as she was grieving. So this is February 2014. This is pretty soon into the relationship, really. But by that time, he already had her under his spell. She was invested.
There's a story that you tell about Tara being in hospital nursing her grandfather, and she was having a conversation with another family member. And then Marcus walked in the middle of a conversation and didn't have any context for what they were talking about. And it really illustrates some paranoia that was sort of inherent within him. What conclusion did he jump to, and what sort of things were they arguing about?
He didn't understand that they had been talking about something completely different. He seized on a particular word in the conversation and bizarrely determined that Tara, her grandmother, and her aunt were all sitting there laughing about the size of his penis. Tara was extremely confused when she realised that she was, in inverted commas, in trouble. He basically took her outside, gave her what for. They left the hospital. He basically told Michael Costigan just outside the door where her grandfather was dying that he didn't know if he could be with Tara because he didn't know if he could be with somebody like Tara.
What sorts of things was he accusing Tara of doing? What was he saying to them?
It was always the same sorts of things. So he was quite obsessed with the idea that she was cheating on him, a completely unjustified suspicion. That was a constant accusation, and he would express his suspicion in really degrading ways. He would just attack her verbally, and she was just lacerated with his words. He just went to town on her and did his utmost to basically crush her spirit. The effect that words can have, it's devastating. She was devastated by the abuse that she suffered. It was always verbal abuse, and it was absolutely shocking. That went on and escalated over time. He would routinely call her, a slut, a liar, a cheat. It became progressively worse over time. Eventually, he began to threaten her with violence, and that was what precipitated her decision to apply for the DVO.
And what did her family think at this point? Because they were seeing first-hand hints of this as well, weren't they?
To an extent, Tara was actually pretty keen to hide a lot of the things that were going on. She didn't want her family to know about a lot of it. She wanted at all costs for this relationship to work, especially once she fell pregnant. She did not want her family to know that she was struggling. So there were many times when the family were given an inkling that something was amiss, but when they tried to chase up on this or that alert that they'd been given that something was not right, that Tara was upset and crying, Tara was always, no, it's cool, don't worry, She was really trying to set their minds at ease about him in the hope that that things would fall into place with Marcus.
Marcus's drug use became quite evident as the relationship went on. What was the nature of his drug use and how did it affect his behaviour?
So he was using anabolic steroids. He was taking those, he said, for back pain relief. He was a builder, so, his body was really was feeling it. Sometime in 2014, he began using ice, which had a catastrophic effect on him and absolutely exacerbated all of the suspicions and his propensity for all those suspicions, and his tendency to fly into rages became that much more common. The ice was just like a match to the flame of his psychology in a way. That's one way you could look at it anyway. I don't know if you can say that it was the match, but it had a disastrous effect.
And so his emotional abuse towards Tara was increasing. Was he spending time as well with her two boys, and were they witnessing the way that he spoke to her?
Yeah, tragically, they were witness to certainly a lot of their mother's distress, and as Tara documented in her DBO, they also witnessed a lot of the incidents that she would later document. Yeah.
And to be clear, at this stage, going towards when she ended their relationship, had there been any physical violence?
No, never. That's a really important point. There had never been any physical violence. So I think, Tara felt, even up until the night before her murder, she felt very secure. She felt absolutely certain that there would be absolutely zero chance. I don't even think the thought probably crossed her mind that she could have been murdered, because when her uncle Michael asked her the night before she was murdered, will he be angry when he learns that you've taken out a DVO against him? She said, oh yeah, he'll go ballistic. And he said, well, will he hurt you? And she said, no, he's never hit me. So the fact that he never had hit her before, she was convinced that he never would, and the concept of being murdered was just so remote as to be ridiculous.
And so when she was pregnant with their daughter, it was during that pregnancy that the relationship ended. What led to the eventual end? Why did she decide to end it then, as opposed to all the other times that he'd been emotionally abusive towards her?
It all culminated during a trip to the coast late in the year of 2014. So Tara was heavily pregnant. They went for a coastal getaway before the baby was born. Marcus had previously told Tara that he would like to reinstigate communication with Kira, his ex, in order to, with the hope of making contact with his infant daughter that he hadn't been able to meet yet. Tara gave her blessing. She thought it might help settle Marcus down a bit because he'd been increasingly volatile. She was not exactly thrilled at the sound of the incoming messages, but she was prepared to tolerate them if it were going to help Marcus. But during this coastal holiday, she had opportunity to look at Marcus's phone and discovered that his communications with Kira, the ex, were far more intimate than she would have liked, put it that way. She was mortified, she was distraught, she was 8 months pregnant. She terminated the relationship, but she was so vulnerable and so longing for the father of her child to be with her that she took him back for a little bit longer until finally one night that was the night Marcus threatened the violence. He cracked his knuckles, spat on her, said, "Shut the F up, C word, before it's the last thing you say." That was the incident that precipitated her decision to lodge the DVO against him.
And what did her family think, and what sort of support did they give her? Were they worried that there was a man who was threatening violence against her, or did they underestimate him as well?
Yeah, there was a lot of acrimony between Tara's family and Marcus. Marcus had taken to messaging Tara's grandmother with several abusive texts, and basically his campaign of harassment against Tara had extended to members of her family. That was also another factor in her decision to apply for the DVO as soon as possible.
And by the time she applied for the DVO, she had given birth to the little girl. I believe that she'd actually tried to on the day that she went into labour. Is that right?
That's exactly right, yeah. So there was a few days passed. She was initially reluctant to let Marcus come and visit her in hospital, but she had a very soft heart. She ended up inviting him to come and meet his little daughter. That went fine. A couple of days later, he turned pretty nasty again. So basically it was very, very volatile. He was sending quite a few abusive messages to members of her family. Her uncle, Michael, stepped in and sent Marcus a message insisting that he stop his harassment of the women in his family. And basically the tone of Marcus's response was such that Tara realised that she had no other option left to her really than to go to the courthouse the next day and apply for the DVO, which she did.
And was she afforded the DVO?
Yeah, she was. Yep.
And
she was.
Did Marcus know that she had gone to file for this DVO? Was he across those movements?
She anticipated that he would be beside himself with rage to be the subject of another DVO. His ex had placed one against him also. She wrote him a really carefully worded message the night before she applied, warning him that this was what she was going to do, that it was a temporary measure though, and that it didn't mean that he wouldn't be able to see their daughter. So she was very, very savvy. She understood exactly how he was going to react and exactly how enraged he was going to be, and she worded it so that she could pacify him as much as she possibly could, so that he could understand that it was a temporary measure. So he did know that this was coming, but the next day, the 27th of February, he spent the morning with Kira and her children, shopping, had a happy morning by all accounts, and then after their shopping trip, he decided to step in to the city police station and just see whether Tara had in fact gone ahead with her decision to apply for the DVO, as she had told him she would. He learned that she had indeed done so. He was served the papers. He went outside and showed the papers to Kira. Kira looked over them and realised that there was a passage in there that allowed her to realise that Marcus had in fact been spending time with Tara at times when she thought that he had been somewhere else, put it that way. And Marcus tried to explain to her that he'd been visiting his daughter, but Kira decided that enough was enough. She couldn't be with somebody who was telling lies, and she broke up the relationship.
Can you talk us through what happened on the last day of February 2015?
So Marcus learned that he was now the subject of a domestic violence order. He stepped out of the city police station. He went to the car where Kira was. He showed Kira the DBO that had been placed against him. She looked over the paperwork and realised that Marcus had been seeing Tara at times when she thought he was somewhere else, when Kira thought he was somewhere else. So she was less than happy and decided to break up with Marcus. They got in the car together and started to drive from Canberra back to Queanbeyan, where they were staying together in a caravan park. As they drove, Kira was driving. Marcus was looking over the paperwork of the domestic violence order, and he said, "Half of this is bullshit." He ripped it up, threw it out the window. Once they arrived back in Queanbeyan, Marcus got into his own vehicle and went to the petrol station. He ended up driving to Bunnings in Tuggeranong, where he purchased an axe, and then drove to the suburb of Calwell, Tara's suburb, and for the better part of the next hour he drove up and down the street above her residential complex before turning into the driveway and pulling up outside her front door. Tara, at that point, it was around 4:30 p.m, and Ricky, Tara's sister, who had moved into the house for a while to help Tara with the kids, Ricky and Bryce, her boyfriend, were relaxing in the garage makeshift bedroom. Tara was down the hall breastfeeding, and Tara's two young sons were watching TV in the lounge room. There was a sound of breaking glass. Ricky and Bryce sprang from the bed they were sprawled out on and went to the laundry from where they could see the front door. Marcus was breaking through the front door with an axe. Tara's sons leapt from the couch, ran toward them. As Marcus came into the house, Tara came bolting up the hall from her bedroom and toward the laundry, where her sister Ricky had extended an arm ready to pull her forward to safety. The first swing of the axe connected with Tara's left shoulder. The next blow struck her in the back of the neck and simultaneously struck Ricky's little finger. At this point, Bryce knocked the axe out of Marcus's hands, and Marcus struck Bryce in the face, causing his nose to bleed. Marcus then walked into the lounge room and smashed the TV. And after he left the house, basically one of the little boys carried the baby over to a neighbour's house, and Ricky was then able to call 000.
It was probably about, 3:40, and then I heard a smash of a window or something, and I thought might have been the boys kicking a ball and put it through the window and they would get in trouble for it. But once I walked out, it wasn't until I seen the boys running towards me, screaming. I looked at the door and I noticed that, and then Tara came in from her bedroom, and then I seen Marcus behind her. He was just screaming.
You tried to grab her?
I tried to grab her to move her close to me and to get into the into my bedroom. But as I put my hands on Tara, that's when he swung and hit us. Swung and hit us both. And from there, Tara fell to the ground. At that point, I grabbed my phone and called 000.
And how did the family, who were all in different places, I believe her grandmother was in hospital at the time, how did they react to the news that something had happened inside Tara's house?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it was incredibly harrowing to hear the stories of how everybody learned what had happened. There's a chapter in the book which is basically devoted to those memories of how they learned. Margaret had been in hospital overnight. She'd just recently come home with Maria when they received a call from Ricky, basically telling them to come over. This phone call was made probably only a minute or two after Tara had actually died. Maria jumped in the car straight away and sped over to Corwell, to the apartment where she came into the house just even before a lot of the emergency crews, and saw Tara lying there in the laundry door.
I'm interested in what Marcus's family actually did afterwards, because they went and visited Tara's family, didn't they?
Yeah, so I've been told. I found that an extraordinary situation. Michael Costigan remembers the day of Marcus's arraignment. He remembers walking into, I think it was Maria's house he walked into, and he saw the Rappel family there, and he went over and gave them a great big hug and assured them that everybody knew that this wasn't their fault. This was not their doing, and that there was a long and horrible journey that lay ahead for all of them, but they never would hold it against them, basically. It's a relationship that's permanent and tragic between these two families. There is so much damage done. There is so much anguish on both ends, undoubtedly.
What was Marcus ultimately convicted of and sentenced to?
Marcus was sentenced to an aggregate term of 32 years, 26 years non-parole. Since then, there has been extra time added after a couple of incidents within the jail.
And there's been a lot of commentary around this case since, that Tara did everything right, in inverted commas. She applied for the order, and she didn't think that this person would physically assault her because it hadn't happened in the past. And you almost can't fault how she went about this in order to protect herself but also her children. Are there any lessons that can be learned in the wake of Tara's murder?
Oh, God, none that will bring her back, sadly. I think it's something that what this illustrates, it's obviously an enormous tragedy, but what it illustrates is how, just as every woman's murder does, it all illustrates just how desperately we need to change as a society in our attitudes towards violence against women. I mean, that's obvious. I think what Tara's story, how it can perhaps help other people, I hope that it's going to highlight for readers the fact that there is a relationship between verbal abuse and intimate partner homicide. I think that's what Tara's story is particularly, I think that's what it basically can help illustrate. Almost 25% of women who were killed by a former or current partner had not previously been the victim of physical abuse by that partner. Tara was one of the 25%. She thought she wasn't in danger because Marcus had never hit her, but the first time he hit her was the time he killed her. So it's incredibly important, I think, that women everywhere understand that this is possible, so that they can recognise signs of abuse and take steps to safely remove themselves from that situation.
There was an interesting point that you made, and it was a small point, but it really made me think about you. I believe you were looking at CCTV footage of him driving to Tara's place, and there was something you noted about how he was driving relatively sensibly, so much so that it would suggest that he had an element of control while he was driving to her house. And I'm not sure if this is what can be drawn from it, but the fact that this wasn't a man who was completely out of control and had no control over his actions. He did have control over his actions when he went in there, and that was a decision he made. Is that how you see it?
That's how that's exactly right. That's what I found that particular piece of footage so compelling on so many different levels. And it's funny because it was such a bland looking piece of footage, but it was I found it incredibly haunting, incredibly chilling. And like the prosecutor told me, you feel like screaming at the screen, don't do it, it's hard to believe what you're staring at what you're looking at as you watch this most mundane scene of a car driving up and down the street. You know what's about to happen. His state of mind was extremely interesting to me, and a bit of a mystery. I definitely found it very interesting that, his car seemed to be travelling pretty much at a nice, sensible speed up and down the street. I theorised a lot around that CCTV footage I really was fascinated by it. I had a theory based on that footage and on obviously more of my research around Marcus's ideas of cowardice. He often accused himself of being a coward, and the fact that he felt like he was too cowardly to kill himself, I began to wonder whether his notion of cowardice might have been at the front of his mind as he was doing these laps up and down in front of Tara's house. And I wondered whether even instead of actively trying to restrain himself from going in, as he claimed, he was in fact trying to summon some sort of courage in his mind, what equated to courage, when in fact obviously it was the ultimate form of cowardice, I guess.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It means a lot. Thank you.
Their legal saga is over, but don't talk to the Costigan family about closure.
Today's verdict does not bring me peace. Tara remains dead.
Tara was only 28, at home in Canberra breastfeeding her 1-week-old daughter when the baby's father, Marcus Rappel, broke in with an axe and, in front of Tara's 2 young boys, attacked her, angry that she'd taken out a domestic violence order against him the day before. The axe severed her spine and cut an artery. Her sister Ricky tried to help, frantically calling 000.
She's got an active wound on her neck.
Okay, can you describe it in more detail, please?
No, I don't. She's hardly breathing on her.
Outside, a neighbour filmed Marcus after the murder. Today, he lashed out in court, unhappy with the judge's version of events.
Just be quiet, please.
It's my daughter.
If you cannot be quiet, I'll have you removed and placed.
Marcus, no!
Remove the accused.
3 security guards pulled him out as he stared at Tara's family and shouted.
Rights for fathers.
His plea of guilty is the only reason Marcus Rappel has any hope of being a free man ever again. Justice Burns said the murder was in the worst category, a shameful and cowardly act of barbarism. And were it not for the guilty plea, he would have sentenced Rappel to life in jail.
We received a life sentence. No parole, no get out of jail card. He deserves the same.
It's never going to bring it back. This has been devastating.
Now, in Tara's name, her family is urging governments to do more to stop domestic violence.
This is a national disgrace.
Rappel will be eligible for parole in 2041 when he's 66 years old. Jane Azzopardi, 9 News.
Heidi Lemon's book is called The First Time He Hit Her, the shocking true story of the murder of Tara Costigan. It's just been released and is available to purchase online at any good bookstores and via the link in the description of this episode. If any parts of this episode were distressing to you, we have included a list of resources available in the description of this episode too. If you or someone you care about is living with family violence, then you can call 1-800-RESPECT. You can also call Safe Steps, which is the 24/7 family violence response line, on 1-800-015-188, or visit safesteps.org.au for further information. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast, hosted by me, Jessie Stevens, and produced by Elise Cooper.